Hey everyone, and welcome to this 5-part video series on how to get better at Scrabble without memorizing tons of words. Now, your first instinct when you hear that title might be, wait a minute, isn't Scrabble all about words? And obviously knowing a lot of words will help you become a better Scrabble player, but at the same time, it's worth noting that top-level Scrabble really does use math and strategy just as much as it uses word knowledge. So while you need both of these things to become a top player, I can almost guarantee that you'll beat 99% of your friends and other casual players just by knowing some of these basic strategical principles that very many people aren't aware of. Now, it's worth noting that Scrabble is different than, say, chess in that Scrabble has a significant amount of luck. And how does Scrabble exactly have so much luck? It's very similar to poker, except that poker, of course, you're being dealt cards, whereas in Scrabble, you're drawing tiles out of a bag. So the analogy I would give is, in poker, there are certain hands, like 2-7 unsuited, for instance, where whether you're a top player or a novice, you really want to fold that hand and you shouldn't be playing it. In Scrabble, there's certain racks you might draw, say if you draw 6 eyes. There obviously aren't a lot of words that have that many eyes. So whether you're a top player or a novice, you really should be exchanging tiles and trying to rid yourself of those eyes. And having hands or racks like that multiple times in a row can definitely be demoralizing and frustrating, but you'll notice, as you do with poker, that the top players do ultimately tend to come out and make it to the final table and come out on top of the field. Just like that, in Scrabble, the top players do tend to prevail over the course of multiple tournaments if you take a large enough sample size. And similarly to poker, where obviously the randomness and having to calculate the probability of drawing a certain card is really the basis of all of the strategy, it's the same thing in Scrabble, really. All of the strategical concepts I'll be introducing in the later videos do revolve around calculating the probability of success, whether success means drawing a bingo on your next turn or your opponent not having a certain tile they need to take advantage of an opening. So the general outline for this 5-part series, in the first video, I'll be mostly just giving an overview of the rules of the game for those who maybe haven't played much before or could use a recap, haven't played in a long time. I'm going to focus on how to find the highest scoring play in the second video, so that'll be more kind of building off of the rules and understanding how to score your plays, trying to figure out, given that and the layout of the board, how can you turn your rack in the existing board into as many points as possible. The third video is going to focus on managing your rack. So while it's good to score a lot of points, it's also very important to think about what you're keeping on your rack so you can hopefully continue to score points the next turn and going forward. So I'll be talking about that in the third video, and then sort of trying to put a lot of that together in the fourth video along with a couple more concepts to have a more holistic view of strategy and decision making, so trying to think about really the current situation, whether it's your rack, the current score, the current state of the board, or all of the above, and putting that all together and coming to a decision as to what the best play is on your given turn. And then finally, in the last video, I'm going to conclude with some advanced topics and also some tournament tips for those who may be aspiring to play a Scrabble tournament in either now or in the future. So part 1, again, is going to be this rules overview. And I'm going to start with some general info about the game and what the objective of the game is. How do you win? What should you be trying to do throughout a game of Scrabble? I'll talk about playing words and what are some legal ways you can make a play, some illegal ways too, some things you're not allowed to do, and how to score your plays. I'll talk about a couple things you can do on a turn other than playing a word, such as exchanging, passing, and challenging. And then finally, I'll talk about some special cases, specifically how does a game of Scrabble begin and how does it end. So let's start with the very basics. And again, I expect this will be familiar to very many viewers, but it's worth just reiterating that in Scrabble, basically, you and your opponent take turns playing words on a board, and the goal is to score the most points. So at the end of the game, whoever scores the most points wins. And I do want to caveat this with, again, the goal in Scrabble is not to score as many points as you can. The goal is to score more points than your opponent. And it's a subtle difference, but it's an important one, and it's one that definitely is going to come up again in later videos, so it's just worth noting again here. And it's also worth pointing out that I know a lot of Casual players will sometimes play a game of Scrabble with 3 or 4 people, and tournaments are actually always played with 2 people. So it's always 1 versus 1 in tournaments, and a lot of the strategy does rely on the fact that you only have 1 opponent. When you have 2 or even 3 opponents, then a lot of the planning can be difficult to apply to that situation, and it's just a lot harder to predict or calculate the odds going forward when there's 2 or even 3 turns ahead of you that could interfere with your plan. So all of the strategies in this video will be as they apply to a 2-person game. And given that's what tournaments always are, that's what this series is going to follow. So let's start with tiles. At the start of every turn in a game, you should have 7 tiles on your rack. This is always the case except for towards the end of the game. So once the bag is empty or nearly empty, if there aren't enough tiles in the bag to fully replenish your rack to 7 tiles, you should take all of the remaining tiles in the bag if there are still tiles, or if the bag is completely empty, then you don't replenish your tiles anymore at that point. As probably many viewers already know, there are 100 tiles in a bag with a predetermined distribution that follows the list I've copied below in this screenshot here. And a lot of people are probably familiar with this. It's usually on the classic square Scrabble boards in the bottom left corner. And the more common letters in words, such as the A and the E, will appear more frequently. They also tend to be worth a lot fewer points compared to tiles like the J and the Z, which are worth a lot more points but only appear once each in the bag. Also worth pointing out that there are 2 blank tiles that are worth 0 points, but as we'll see later, they're very valuable because they can be any letter and they make it a lot easier for you to bingo or make other high-scoring plays. Now, in addition to the tiles, there's of course the board, and I'll be using this same diagram a lot throughout the series. It's a 15 by 15 board with a mix of regular squares and bonus squares. So with the regular squares, I'll be talking about this a lot more detail in the scoring section, which I'll get to in a couple minutes. But basically, the regular squares don't add any point value to your play, and the bonus squares all add points to your play. So there's 4 different types of bonus squares. There's the triple word scores, which are in red, and they are on the corners or sides of the board. So you'll see there's 3 of them in each of the top and bottom rows, which I'm highlighting here, and there's also 2 of them in the center row on the extreme sides of the board, all the way on the left over here, and another one all the way on the right. The triple letter scores are all in either the 6th or the 10th rows or columns. So you'll see here in the 6th column vertically, as well as the 10th column vertically, and then also a couple more in the 6th row and the 10th row. The double word scores are all on the 2 main diagonals of the board in pink. So you'll see them over here, say in the top left where I'm highlighting right now, and then symmetrically in the top right and bottom left and bottom right. And also important to note that the central square, which is usually covered in a star, is a double word score. And then finally we have the light blue squares, which are double letter scores, and they're a little more scattered throughout the board. You've got a cluster of 4 right here in the middle near the central square, and then you've got a bunch of other ones scattered generally towards the side of the board, not too far from the triple word scores. So how do you start a game of Scrabble? The key thing to keep in mind, and again I expect this will be familiar to a lot of viewers, is the first word has to cover the center square, which as I mentioned on the last slide is a double word score. And you're allowed to play either horizontally or vertically. So in this case the first board here shows a legal opening play because the U has covered the central double word score. However, the board on the right is not a valid opening play because as you can see, the central square is still exposed. So this is not allowed. It would be legal if it were shifted 1 column to the left, since again you can play either vertically or horizontally, but one of your tiles from the opening play does have to cover the central square. Now, after the first play, there's really 3 rules that every word that's placed on the board has to follow. So all of the tiles you make on a single play have to be all in a single row or column. So what this means is you can't play tiles in an L shape, for instance. You also can't play some tiles on one row and then play some tiles on a row 6 rows below that. That's never legal. And all words you make have to be connected to at least one existing word. So if someone makes an opening covering the star as they have to, I can't just decide to go cover the triple word score in the top right corner of the board, since that wouldn't connect to the existing play. And worth mentioning, diagonal does not count as far as connections go. So I can't make a play where only it connects to an existing word by virtue of a diagonal connection between 2 tiles. That is not allowed. And the third condition, which I think will be a little bit more clear when we go through some examples, is there can't be any unoccupied squares played or between any tiles that you play on a single turn. So what this means is if all the tiles that you play on a turn aren't in a continuous string, anything breaking them up must be tiles already on the board. So I can't sort of start laying down tiles and then continue laying down tiles in the same row or column if there's a unoccupied square between those 2 groups of tiles. So with all that said, let's look at some common types of plays. One of them you see very often is playing perpendicular to an existing word. So in this example, your opponent has started out with the word quart, and you've put a Z onto quart to make quartz, and also played the word crazy perpendicular to quart. You can also play perpendicular through a word, or to a word through existing tiles. So in this case, I've used the Q in quart to make the word quill. You can play next to existing words, so this could be playing above or below a word, or also to the side of a word. In this case, I've played the word fish under the word quart, and in the process I've also made the 2 other words QI, us, and ah. Another less common but important type of play is an extension. So in this case, I've extended the word quart to make the word quartered. And then finally, this one is a little bit more complicated, but it's really just a combination of all of the previous examples. In this case, I've played the word gargantuan through the open word gar, the letter A, and the letter N. And in this case, you will notice, you will notice that the letters I've played are not all touching one another, right? I've played this group here. I've played the N, the T, the U, and the A. And I've also played the G. But the key is that there's no gap between them, right? Because the tile between them is already on the board. If this A were not already here, then this would be an illegal play. But because there's already a tile in that spot, I'm not creating any discontinuities with my play, and this is legal. And you'll notice that I've also created a bunch of other words in the process. I've played perpendicular to rift to make grift, and similarly for fan, past, and the 2 other words up and ah. So now moving on to the next section, now that we understand what types of plays are legal, it's important to understand how scoring works for these different plays. So the one thing to keep in mind is that you get points for all new words that you form. What this means is you don't get points for any words whose tiles you play through if you don't extend the word. Like if I play perpendicular to a word through a tile already on the board, I don't get points for the word that was originally there. When you're adding up the value for a word, double and triple letter scores are always applied first before the double and triple word scores. And if you play all 7 of your tiles, which is called a bingo in Scrabble, you get a 50-point bonus, and this bonus is applied after all of the bonus squares are applied. So you don't, if you're on a triple word score and you play a bingo, you don't triple the 50-point bonus. The bonus is applied after the word score and any relevant letter scores are applied. And the last point that I know does create a lot of confusion among some newer players is bonus squares can only be used once. And what do I mean by that? If you extend a word that had already covered a bonus square or multiple bonus squares, you don't get the benefit of using those squares again. You'd only get the letter value of that extended word. So you only can use, or you only get the benefit of a bonus square the first time that bonus square is covered. And a good way to think about that is if you'd have to pick up a tile already on the board to reveal what bonus square it was covering, then you can't get any benefit for that bonus square. So let's take a look at this in action. We're actually going to be using the same examples that we just looked at before. So let's go back to the first example where I've played the word crazy perpendicular to the word quart, also forming quarts. Now in this case, I'm going to get points for quarts in addition to crazy since I've extended the word quart. For crazy, I get 24 because I do get to take advantage of the double letter scores for both the A right here as well as the Y right here. So you'll see up top in my computation, I've multiplied the value of the A by 2 and likewise for the Y. Now for quarts, I only get the letter value of the word because the double letter score covered by the Q and the double word score covered by the T don't contribute anymore since they've already been used. So in this case, I'll get 24 points for quarts because the Q and Z each contribute 10 and the U, A, R, and T each contribute 4, as you can see up top. So I get 24 for crazy and 24 for quarts, making a total of 48 points for the play. Now let's look at this case where I've played the word quill from the Q in quart. Now I don't get any points for quart because I haven't extended the word, I've only played another word through one of the tiles in quart. So here I'm just going to get points for quill, and in this case, the letter value adds up to 14, 10 for the Q and 1 for each of the 4 other tiles, but the L at the bottom is on a double word score, so I multiply the entire letter value by 2 as above, and I end up getting 14 times 2, which is 28. Now in this case, it's a little bit more complicated because I actually have 4 different words I'm getting points for. I formed the word fish with my play, but I've also made the words QI, us, and ah using the letters in quart. And I will get points for all of these, so that comes out to 14 for fish, again noting that the F is on a double letter score. I get 11 for QI, 2 for us, and 5 for ah, which is a total of 32 for the entire play. Now for this play, I'm again only getting points for the one word of quartered, and I get the double letter on the D, which I've just covered for the first time. But once again, I don't get the benefit of the bonus squares already covered by the word quart, so I'll get the letter value for all of the letters in quart, as well as the E, the R, and the E that I've placed down, and twice the value for the D, yielding a total score of 21. Now this last play is a little bit more complicated, but it's really just an extension of all of the previous methodologies we've applied to the other plays. So I'm going to get points for each of the 6 words I've formed. I'm going to get points for gargantuan, which is sort of the main word I've formed with my play, but also the 5 other words I've created at the same time. So for gargantuan, you'll see I've covered both a double letter score with my G, as well as a double word score with my U. And as we mentioned on the previous slide, letter scores are always applied before word scores. So you'll see in the calculation up top, I've multiplied the value of my G by 2, and then summed that with all of the remaining letter values, and only after I've done all of that, in parentheses, then do I multiply the value of the word by 2 because of the double word score. And it turns out that's going to yield 28 points for gargantuan. Now for grift, the key thing to keep in mind is that even though I already doubled the G when I was computing the score for gargantuan, I get to double it again for grift because now I'm using it in a separate direction for a separate word. So in this case, I'm going to get 4 times the value of the G using that one square. I'll get it twice horizontally for gargantuan and another 2 times vertically for grift. So for grift, I end up getting 11 points. I get the G doubled and then the letter value for the R, I, F, T, and rift, which were already there. Fan and past are similar. The FA and the PAS were already there, so I'm just going to get the letter value for those 2 words, 6 for fan and also 6 for past. Now for up, similarly to the G and grift, I do get the benefit of the double word score both directions, horizontally for gargantuan and vertically for up. So you'll see that I do get to apply the 2 times multiplier to the entire letter value for up, to get 4 times 2 or 8 points. And finally for I get 5 points, which yields a total for the entire play of 64 points. Now, shifting away from scoring, you may be wondering, what if I play something that's not a word, or what if my opponent plays something I don't think is a word? So the way this works is if, let's say, your opponent thinks you played a non-word, then they can challenge. And what happens is, if it's not a word, then you have to take back your tiles, you score 0, and you lose your turn, and then your next turn has to be played with the same tiles you started this turn with. But if it is a word, your opponent is going to lose a turn as a penalty for an incorrect challenge, and you'll go again. It's worth noting that all new words that are created by your play, in addition to the, so to speak, main word, have to be valid for the play to be valid. So to sort of illustrate this, if we go back to the previous example of the gargantuan play, it just happens that grift, fan, passed, up, and are all valid words, so this play is valid. But it's worth pointing out that gargantuan being valid, even though that's sort of the main word I've made, is not good enough. If, let's say, for instance, the word fat was what instead, so if this P was a W, then I'd have made the word UW in the process, which is not a word. So even though everything else is valid, just the fact that that one two-letter word would not be valid would render the entire play invalid, and it could be challenged off. Now, sort of on the flip side, what if I can't play a word? What if I have like all consonants or something and I don't have a valid play? Or maybe I don't want to play a word. What if I want to get rid of a bunch of tiles, but I don't see a good way to do that? So the good news is you can exchange anywhere between 1 and all 7 of your tiles back to the bag. So how this works is you put those tiles back in the bag, and then you draw the same number of replacement tiles from the bag. This does count as a turn and you score 0, but it's a very valuable way to help clean up your rack, which we'll be talking about in a later video. The one caveat here is that towards the end of the game, if there are strictly fewer than 7 tiles in the bag, so towards the end game, you cannot exchange. So something that's important to keep in mind if you're stuck with some tiles you don't want later down the stretch, just be mindful of the fact that once there are less than 7 tiles, you're not going to be able to exchange. You can also pass your turn and keep your existing tiles and score 0. This is generally not something I recommend. If you're frustrated with your existing rack or can't make a word, you should probably be exchanging, hoping for better tiles as opposed to passing. There are a couple of very specific and advanced situations when passing can be optimal, and we won't be discussing those in this video series. It's worth keeping in mind, but generally speaking, you should be exchanging instead of passing 99.9% of the time when both are an option. Now, how does a game end? So there's 2 ways a game can end. The first one, and the more common one, is when the bag is empty and one of the players uses their last tiles. And when this happens, the player who uses their tiles adds double the letter value of their opponent's remaining tiles to their score. So what this would look like is, let's say I use my last tile and my opponent still has an X on their rack. X is worth 8 points, so that means I'm going to get 2 times 8, which is 16 points added to my score. Another way a game can end is with 6 consecutive 0 scores. So these could come from exchanges, passes, or lost challenges. This doesn't happen that often, but one case it can happen is towards the end of the game. If both players have a tile they can't legally play and are forced to pass their turn, and that would cause possibly 6 passes in a row and the game to end in this situation. If this happens, then each player would subtract the letter value of the tiles on their rack. Notably, only single the letter value, not double the letter value, as in case 1. So let's say I had a Q and my opponent had an X, and neither of us had a spot for it, and we both passed 3 times each towards the end of the game because we couldn't play our tile. In this case, the game would end. I would subtract 10 points from my total score for the Q. My opponent would subtract 8 points from their total score for the X. And that concludes this part of the series. Please join me for part 2, which will be about finding the highest scoring play.